Emily was not the kind of girl who lived a big, shining life. She was not rich, not powerful, not even known outside her small town. She was just a simple young woman with tired eyes and a soft smile. A smile she had learned to wear even when her heart felt heavy. She worked long hours as a waitress in a modest restaurant on the corner of a busy street, a place where the smell of fried food mixed with coffee and the sound of clinking cups filled the air from morning till midnight. She was always there, carrying trays, wiping tables, and saying polite words to strangers who hardly remembered her face the next day. Her family was everything to her. She lived with her mother, a kind but weary woman who spent her days sewing clothes for neighbors, and her little brother, who was still in school and dreamed of becoming an artist. Their lives were not easy. Money was always short, bills piled up, and yet Emily tried her best to keep hope alive inside their small home. She believed that as long as they stuck together, they could survive any storm, but deep down, she carried a pain that never left her. A pain tied to the one person who was missing from their family, her father. Emily's father had disappeared years ago, when she was still a teenager. He had not died, at least no one had proved that, but he had vanished without a word, leaving behind only confusion and heartbreak. The memory of his laughter still echoed in her mind. The way he used to pat her head when she studied late. The way he would lift her little brother high in the air and make him laugh until tears came. Those memories were the treasures she clung to, but they were also the shadows that haunted her, because no one knew where he had gone, or why he had left. Some whispered he had run away from debts. Others said something darker might have happened, but Emily never believed he would abandon them without reason. Her heart told her there was more to the story. So every day, as she tied her apron and served strangers, Emily carried that secret ache inside. She had learned not to show it, because life demanded strength, not tears. Her co-workers at the restaurant sometimes teased her for being too serious, too quiet, but they didn't know that inside her silence, a storm always lived, a storm of questions she could never answer. She had to be both daughter and sister, and she had to be strong enough for all of them. The restaurant itself was not special. It had flickering neon lights outside and wooden tables that had seen better days. But for Emily, it was the stage of her daily life. She had regular customers she recognized, old men who drank coffee for hours, families who came in on weekends, tired workers who ordered quick meals before heading home. She served them all with patience, her polite sir and ma'am becoming almost automatic. Yet sometimes she looked at these people and wondered about their lives, if they too carried invisible wounds, if they too were waiting for someone who never came home. Even though Emily's world was small, she dreamed quietly. She dreamed of studying further, of finding better work, of giving her brother the chance to chase his art. She dreamed of seeing her mother smile without worry. But these dreams always stayed locked in her heart, because the reality in front of her demanded survival first. Dreams could wait. Food and rent could not. So she kept working, table after table, day after day. Her father's absence shaped her more than she admitted. When she saw fathers picking up their children from the restaurant after school, she felt a sharp sting in her chest. When she overheard co-workers talking about family dinners with both parents at the table, she forced a smile and pretended not to care, but inside she wished for the impossible. She wished to hear his voice again, to ask him why he left, to ask him if he still thought of them. Every night before sleeping, she whispered a small prayer, not even sure who she was speaking to, just hoping the universe would send her some sign, something to tell her the truth she had been craving for so long. Her mother avoided the topic. Whenever Emily asked about her father, her mother's eyes filled with tears and her lips tightened. She would say, "We must move on, Emily." But Emily knew her mother never truly let go either. She would sometimes catch her staring at the old photograph of him on the shelf, her fingers brushing the frame gently, as if touching him through the glass. Their house was full of silence when it came to him, a silence heavier than words, but it only deepened Emily's determination. One day, somehow, she would know the truth. The night that would change everything started like any other. Emily left home in her simple uniform, kissed her mother's cheek, and promised her little brother she would bring him leftover pie if any was left. She walked the familiar road to the restaurant, the street lamps casting long shadows, the cool air brushing her cheeks. She thought it was just another shift, another night of carrying trays, but destiny had already prepared something extraordinary for her. Something that would turn her ordinary world upside down. Something that would make her whisper words she never thought she would say. Emily did not know yet that her path would soon cross with one of the most powerful men in the city. A man who carried secrets linked directly to the father she had been missing all these years. She had no idea that behind the polished glass windows of her small restaurant, fate was waiting to collide her humble life with the glittering, dangerous world of the rich, and when it did, nothing would remain the same. The evening seemed calm when Emily stepped into the restaurant. The same smell of roasted chicken and coffee filled the air. The same sound of chatter and clinking plates echoed around her. She tied her apron, brushed her hair back, and got ready for another long shift. Nothing about that night looked different at first, but fate was already arranging a moment she could never have imagined. A moment that would shake her ordinary world. Around 7 o'clock, just as the dinner crowd began to thicken, the glass door swung open with a sharp push, and a tall man entered. His presence was like a sudden wind that made everything else pause. People in the restaurant turned their heads almost at the same time. Whispers quickly followed, and Emily noticed the change in the air instantly. It wasn't just another customer. This man carried an aura that filled the room before he even spoke a word. He was Richard Hale, a billionaire CEO, a name that most people in the city had read about in newspapers or seen on television. He owned companies, skyscrapers, and industries that employed thousands. He was the kind of man whose face was familiar even to people who never met him. He had that polished look, sharp suit, silver watch, leather shoes that shined under the lights, and a confidence in the way he walked that showed he was used to being in control, used to being obeyed, used to getting exactly what he wanted. Emily had seen wealthy customers before, businessmen, travelers, even minor celebrities. But this man was different. He carried weight. His steps were heavy with importance, and even the restaurant manager rushed forward, nearly tripping over himself, to greet him politely. "Good evening, Mr. Hale, welcome," the manager said, bowing his head slightly. His voice nervous yet eager to please. Richard simply nodded, his expression calm but unreadable, his eyes scanning the restaurant as if judging whether the place was worthy of his time. Behind him, 2 associates followed, younger men in suits, holding briefcases and talking quietly to one another. They looked serious, like people who lived in the shadow of someone more powerful. Emily stood near the counter holding a tray, pretending to focus on her work. But her heart beat a little faster. She knew instantly that serving this man would not be like serving others. She could already feel the tension building in the air. The manager, eager to impress, whispered to Emily, "Table 7, you take care of him, make no mistakes, understand?" She nodded quickly, though inside she felt her palms grow sweaty. Table 7 was one of the best in the restaurant, tucked near the window with soft lighting, usually reserved for important guests. Emily carried menus and glasses of water toward the table, her steps careful, her eyes steady. She told herself she had done this job 100 times before. Yet tonight something about it felt unreal, like she was stepping into a story that wasn't hers. When she reached the table, Richard was already seated, his suit jacket folded neatly on the chair beside him, his watch glinting under the light. He barely looked up when she placed the water down, his attention fixed on his phone for a moment. His associates sat on either side, discussing numbers and contracts in hushed voices. Emily spoke softly, her voice professional but gentle. "Good evening, sir. May I take your order?" He finally lifted his eyes toward her, and for a second, Emily felt as if he could see right through her, his gaze sharp, piercing, the kind of look that could silence a room. She forced herself not to look away. He gave a small nod and handed her the menu back. "Steak, medium rare, and your best red wine," he said in a low, commanding tone. His associates ordered quickly after him, their choices plain compared to his. Emily wrote it all down with steady hands, though her chest felt tight. She thanked them politely and walked away, but she could still feel his eyes on her back, a strange pressure that made her wonder if he noticed how nervous she was. The restaurant staff moved faster than usual, trying to keep everything perfect. The chef shouted instructions in the kitchen. The manager hovered near table 7, watching Emily's every move. Some customers whispered to each other, surprised to see a billionaire dining in such a modest place. It was unusual for someone like Richard Hale to come here, a restaurant that was good but not extravagant, and Emily herself wondered the same. Why would a man with access to the finest dining in the city choose this humble corner tonight? Was it business? Was it secrecy? Or just coincidence? She couldn't know then, but the reason would soon become clear. As she returned with bread and a bottle of wine, she noticed Richard placing a leather folder on the table. He opened it briefly, scanned a few pages, then set it aside while pouring himself a glass of water. Emily didn't pay much attention at first. It seemed like ordinary business papers. After all, he was a man of business, always surrounded by contracts and deals. Yet her eyes caught a small detail as she placed the bread basket down. Her breath hitched for a moment, though she quickly turned away. It was nothing, she told herself, just a shadow of familiarity. But the truth was already circling closer to her. For the moment, she kept moving, balancing trays, greeting customers, but no matter what she did, her thoughts kept drifting back to table 7. The billionaire's calm voice, the way his associates treated him with silent respect, the strange weight of that folder he carried. She didn't know why, but she felt something about this night was meant to change her life. She just didn't know how, not yet. And so, while the rest of the restaurant buzzed with ordinary life, while couples laughed over dinner and children tugged at their parents' sleeves, one young waitress and one powerful billionaire sat on opposite sides of fate, unaware that their worlds were about to collide in the most unexpected way. A single moment, a single whisper, was waiting to tear the silence apart. The dinner service continued as usual. Plates clattered in the kitchen. Waiters rushed from one table to another, and the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread spread through the air. Emily tried to keep her focus on her work, but her mind kept returning to the important guest at table 7. She had served him water, bread, and wine. She had written down his order, but something about the billionaire's quiet presence pulled at her attention. It was as if an invisible thread tied her eyes back to him no matter how hard she tried to look away. Richard Hale sat tall and composed, his back straight, his hands calm. He spoke in low tones with his associates, sometimes serious, sometimes with a small smile, but his face remained hard to read. He was a man who carried secrets, that much Emily could sense, and yet she told herself to stop staring. She was only a waitress. She had no business thinking about men like him. Her job was to serve and then step back into the shadows. Still, destiny was already arranging something she could not ignore. When Emily returned with their wine, she noticed Richard opening the leather folder again. This time he pulled out a stack of documents, thick with papers, clipped neatly together. His associate leaned over, pointing at a page, whispering something about investments and deadlines. Richard nodded, making small notes with a gold pen that glimmered in the warm light of the restaurant. The papers looked ordinary to anyone else, just business, numbers, and signatures. But as Emily placed the wine glasses down carefully, her eyes drifted, just for a second, toward the top sheet of paper, and her breath caught. She froze inside, though her hands kept working, the way her body moved on autopilot. She poured the wine with steady fingers, but her heart started pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears, because there, at the bottom of the page, was a name she had not seen in years, a name written in a style she could never mistake. It was the handwriting of her father. The letters curved in the exact way she remembered from school notes he used to sign, from old report cards, from the little messages he scribbled on grocery lists. It was so clear, so familiar, that for a moment she thought her eyes were tricking her. She blinked twice, trying to calm herself. Maybe it was just someone with the same name. Maybe it was a coincidence. But no, the handwriting, the unique curl of the letters, it was his. She knew it with every bone in her body. Emily stepped back from the table, tray pressed tightly to her chest, her hands trembling slightly. She tried to breathe, tried to act normal, but her thoughts spun in a storm. How could her father's name, his signature, appear in the hands of a billionaire? What did it mean? Was her father alive? Had he been involved with this man? The questions came faster than she could control, and with each question her chest grew tighter. She moved to the counter, pretending to check her order slips, but her eyes kept darting back to table 7. Richard flipped through more papers, but that one sheet stayed on the top for a long time, her father's name bold and undeniable. She remembered nights when she and her mother sat at the table searching through old documents he had left behind. Receipts, old letters, and that same signature stared back at her now from across the room. It was like the past had leapt into the present, without warning. For years, Emily had lived with silence, her mother refusing to speak much about what happened, neighbors gossiping with half-truths, her heart carrying a hollow space where her father should have been. And now, in the middle of an ordinary shift, his presence had appeared in black ink on expensive paper. a cruel trick of fate, or maybe a long-hidden secret finally pushing itself into the light. Her knees felt weak, but she knew she couldn't collapse. She had to stay strong, at least until she understood what this meant. When she returned to their table to refill the glasses, her eyes accidentally brushed the page again, and she whispered under her breath, too soft for anyone but herself, "That's my father's signature." The words slipped out like air escaping from her lungs. She didn't plan to say them, but the shock inside her refused to stay silent. She quickly bit her lip, praying no one had heard. But the universe had different plans, because Richard Hale's hand froze on his glass, and his eyes slowly turned toward her. Emily's heart jumped. She wanted to run, to hide, to pretend she had said nothing. But his gaze was locked on her, sharp and unblinking. He studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, like he could see every secret inside her. For the first time that evening, Richard looked unsettled. His composure cracked, his hand trembled slightly, and then, to her horror, the glass slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor with a loud crash. The restaurant went silent for a moment. All eyes turned toward table 7. The billionaire's glass shattered into tiny pieces on the polished wood floor, red wine spreading like blood across the tiles. His associates jumped up, startled, one of them reaching for napkins, the manager rushing forward in panic, but Richard didn't move. He kept staring at Emily, his face pale, his jaw tight, as if the whisper she had let slip had pierced him deeper than the broken glass ever could. Emily bent down to clean the mess, her hands shaking, her breath uneven, but inside her mind, she repeated the words over and over. That was her father's signature. There was no mistake. She had seen it with her own eyes, and now, from the look on Richard's face, she knew it was no coincidence. He recognized the connection too. Something about her father mattered to him. Something hidden in those papers, something powerful enough to make a billionaire drop his glass in front of an entire restaurant. She didn't know it yet, but this single discovery, this single whisper, would tear open the past she thought was buried forever. The truth was coming, piece by piece, and it had started right there at table 7, under the glow of ordinary lights, in the hands of a girl who had only come to work another shift. The sound of the glass shattering on the floor still echoed in Emily's ears, though the restaurant quickly returned to its usual noise. The clinking of forks, the hum of voices, the soft music in the background, but for her, everything seemed to slow down, like the world was holding its breath. Richard Hale's eyes were fixed on her, and that piercing stare felt heavier than the broken glass scattered across the tiles. She bent down to pick up the larger pieces, her hands trembling slightly, trying to act calm, trying to appear like just another waitress cleaning up a spill, but she could feel her pulse racing. Her whisper had not been meant for anyone to hear. It had slipped out by accident. Yet the way the billionaire reacted told her that he had heard every word, and those words had shaken him deeply, more deeply than she could understand in that moment. The manager rushed to her side, scolding in a hushed tone, "Be careful, Emily, don't cut yourself." And then turning to Richard with a nervous smile, "So sorry for the accident, sir. We'll bring you another glass immediately." But Richard didn't respond to the manager. His face had lost some of its color, his jaw tightened, his eyes still fixed on Emily like she had just pulled a secret out of the shadows and laid it bare in front of him. Emily lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning. She quickly wiped the red stain of wine spreading across the floor, but her mind was not on the mess. It was on the document, the signature. Her father's name staring at her from those pages. She tried to keep her voice steady as she whispered to herself again, "No mistake, it's his." But she knew Richard was still watching her closely, his silence heavier than any words. Finally, as she rose from the floor, Richard spoke, his voice low but firm. "What did you just say?" The question cut through the air like a knife. His associates glanced at each other nervously, sensing something unusual was happening. Even the manager hesitated, unsure if he should stay or step back. Emily froze, her tray still in her hand. Her lips parted but no sound came out. She hadn't expected him to confront her directly. She thought maybe he would ignore it, pretend he hadn't heard, but here he was, demanding to know what she had meant. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her instinct told her to deny it, to say it was nothing, but something stronger inside her pushed the truth out. the same truth that had been locked inside her for years. "That signature?" she said softly, almost trembling. "I know it. It belongs to my father." The words hung in the air, fragile but powerful, and as soon as she said them, she knew nothing could ever go back to the way it was before. Richard's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He looked at her as if trying to read every line of her face, every detail of her expression. His breathing grew heavier, and then, in a voice that carried both disbelief and something close to fear, he asked, "Your father?" Emily nodded slowly, her chest rising and falling quickly. "Yes, my father's name, my father's writing. I would know it anywhere." Her voice cracked slightly, but her eyes were steady. She wanted him to understand that she was certain. There was no doubt. For a moment, silence fell over the table. His associates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to speak or remain quiet. The manager took a small step backward, sensing this was no longer just about spilled wine, but something deeper, something personal. Emily felt the weight of every eye on her. Yet it was Richard's reaction that mattered most, and what she saw in his face was not anger, but recognition, a recognition that sent a shiver down her spine. He leaned back slowly, running a hand over his mouth, his eyes never leaving her. "Impossible," he muttered, almost to himself. "After all these years." His voice trailed off, but Emily caught the words. Her heart hammered even harder. What did he mean by "after all these years"? Did he know her father? Had he been hiding something? The questions screamed inside her head, but she couldn't form them into sentences yet. She was too stunned, too overwhelmed by the collision of her ordinary life with this powerful man's secret world. Emily wanted answers, but she was afraid of what they might be. Still, she stepped closer, her voice firmer this time. "Please, tell me, do you know him? Do you know my father?" Her eyes searched his face desperately, hoping for even a small clue. Richard hesitated, his lips pressed tightly together, his eyes flickering with a storm of emotions he seemed to be fighting to control: guilt, fear, regret, something deep that he couldn't hide completely. At that moment, Emily realized that her whisper had cracked something open inside him. Something he had buried long ago. Something he didn't expect to face tonight. Not in a small restaurant. Not from a young waitress who carried his past in her eyes. He looked away for the first time, his hand gripping the edge of the table, as if steadying himself against memories too heavy to bear. The atmosphere in the restaurant had changed completely, though most of the customers had returned to their meals. Unaware of the storm brewing at table 7, Emily and Richard both felt the shift. They were no longer waitress and customer. No longer strangers from different worlds. There was a connection now, fragile but undeniable, built on a name, a signature, and years of silence finally cracking open. Emily's chest ached with a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that this man held the answers she had longed for since childhood. Fear that the truth might be darker than she was ready to face. Richard, on the other hand, looked like a man trapped between two choices: to reveal what he knew, or to push it back into the shadows. But his shaking hand, his pale face, told Emily that he could not hide it forever. The moments stretched on, heavy and endless, until finally Richard whispered, his voice almost breaking. "If that really is your father, then there are things you don't know, things I never wanted to speak of again." His words made Emily's breath hitch, her hands tightening around the tray she held. She knew then that the shocking recognition between them was only the beginning. The door to the truth had just opened, and what waited behind it could change her life forever. Emily stood frozen. Beside the table, her tray pressed tightly against her chest. Her eyes locked on Richard Hale, the powerful man who suddenly looked less like a billionaire and more like someone caught in a storm of memories. His jaw was tight. His hands still gripped the table, and the papers with her father's signature lay there between them like a bridge connecting two worlds that were never meant to meet. Emily's voice had been soft, but her words had already shaken him. Now the silence that followed felt like a rope pulling both of them tighter, neither ready to let go. She tried to steady her breath, her heart still racing, and asked again, her voice trembling but determined, "Please, sir, tell me, how do you know my father?" The words cut through the air, small but sharp. His associates looked up from their seats, shifting uncomfortably. glancing at Richard as if waiting for him to wave it off. But he didn't. He just stared at Emily, his expression unreadable, a mix of shock, guilt, and something close to fear. The restaurant manager, sensing tension but not understanding its depth, whispered, "Emily, perhaps you should step aside." But she shook her head slightly, her feet rooted to the floor. She could not walk away, not when her father's name had appeared right in front of her after so many years, not when this man's reaction told her the truth was close, closer than it had ever been. She refused to let the moment pass, even if her job, her pride, or her safety was at risk. Richard finally broke the silence, his voice low, like he was choosing every word carefully. "You shouldn't concern yourself with these documents. They have nothing to do with you," he said. But his tone was not steady. There was hesitation behind it, a flicker of weakness that Emily caught immediately. She stepped closer, her eyes steady on him. "It has everything to do with me?" she replied. "That name, that signature, it belongs to my father, the man who disappeared from my life years ago, the man we never stopped waiting for." Her words seemed to strike him harder than he expected. His hand trembled slightly, and his associates exchanged uneasy looks. One of them leaned toward him and whispered, "Sir, maybe we should continue this elsewhere." But Richard raised his hand, silencing them. His eyes still locked on Emily. He was trapped now, cornered not by force but by truth, by the determination in the eyes of a girl who had nothing but still dared to demand answers from him. Emily's voice grew stronger, even though her chest ached. "Please," she said. "I've spent years wondering if he's alive, if he's safe, or if he just left us behind. Every day I saw my mother hide her pain. Every night I heard my brother ask about him, and I had no answers, but you." She pointed at the papers, her hands shaking. "You have something? You know something, don't you?" Richard leaned back slowly, exhaling a long breath, his sharp, controlled mask slipping for the first time. He looked at her with eyes that seemed to carry years of weight, and for a moment, Emily thought he might break down completely, but he straightened, trying to hold himself together. "Your father was someone important to me years ago," he admitted quietly. "He was not just a man who vanished, he was part of something bigger, something dangerous." His voice cracked slightly, but he regained his tone. "And if you truly are his daughter, then you should be careful with the questions you ask." Emily's stomach twisted at his words, but instead of fear, it lit a fire inside her. "Dangerous?" she whispered. "My father was a good man. He loved us. He would never be part of anything that could hurt us." She stepped even closer, her eyes bright with tears. "Don't make him sound like a stranger. Don't make him sound like a criminal. You know more than you're saying, and I won't leave until you tell me the truth." Richard's face tightened, his hand rubbing his temple as if the pressure of her questions pressed into his skull. His associates were restless now. One of them muttered, "Sir, this is drawing attention." And indeed, a few customers at nearby tables had started to glance over, sensing something unusual, but Emily didn't care. She had waited too many years for a moment like this. She was not going to let it slip away because of whispers or stares. Her determination cornered him further, his polished calm slipping bit by bit, until finally he leaned forward, his voice low, meant only for her. "You're right. I do know him, and I know what happened the night he disappeared." Emily's breath caught, her knees almost buckling, but she forced herself to stand firm. "Tell me?" she demanded softly. "Please, tell me everything." The weight of her words pressed against him, and for the first time in years, Richard Hale looked like a man unsure of his own power. He hesitated, his eyes flickering between her face and the papers on the table, as if the signature itself mocked him, pulling secrets out of the shadows. Finally, he whispered, "Your father refused me once, refused something that could have changed both our lives, and because of that, he vanished. I thought he was gone forever. But if you stand here now, then maybe he's not." Emily's chest tightened, the ground beneath her feet seemed to sway. She wanted to scream, to ask 100 questions at once, but her throat closed. The words stuck inside her. She had gotten her first answer, but it only opened more doors, more mysteries, more fear. She looked at Richard, searching for more, but he looked away, as if afraid of his own memories, as if the truth was too heavy to carry out loud in a crowded restaurant. The confrontation left the air heavy, The room felt smaller, tighter, and Emily realized she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She had pulled a billionaire into her pain, forced him to admit a truth he had buried, and now there was no turning back. He knew her father, he knew the story, and she would not stop until she knew it too. Even if the answers would break her heart, Emily's hands trembled as she stood near the table, her heart thudding in her chest so loudly she thought everyone in the restaurant could hear it. She had just forced a confession out of a man who usually had the power to silence anyone. A billionaire who commanded respect with a single glance. Yet now his voice carried hesitation, regret, and something he clearly did not want to share. But Emily's stubborn courage had pulled a piece of the past back into the present, and she was not going to let it go. Richard Hale leaned back slowly, his face pale under the golden lights, his eyes drifting to the glass of red wine that still sat untouched before him. He picked it up with a shaking hand, took a slow sip, and then placed it down again, as if preparing himself for something heavy. Emily stood silently, waiting, her eyes fixed on him, every muscle in her body tight with expectation. She could sense that what he was about to say might finally explain the years of silence, the absence, and the pain that had shaped her life. After a long pause, Richard finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Your father, Daniel, was a brilliant man, far more brilliant than most people realized. He wasn't just a worker or an ordinary partner. He had ideas, inventions, things that could have changed industries, things people like me wanted very much." His words were slow, deliberate, and each one sank into Emily's heart like a stone. She had always known her father was intelligent, kind, resourceful, but hearing a billionaire call him brilliant made her chest ache with both pride and fear. Pride that her father had been so gifted, fear that his gift was the very reason he had disappeared. Richard's associates exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with him revealing so much. One leaned forward and whispered urgently, "Sir, maybe this isn't the time." But Richard raised his hand to silence them, his eyes never leaving Emily. "She deserves to know," he muttered, then continued. "Years ago, your father was working with me. We were close, we trusted each other. We started something together, a project, a design, but when it came time to sign over the rights, he refused. He believed it should belong to everyone, not just to men like me who profit from it, and that refusal changed everything." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She imagined her father standing in front of this powerful man, holding firm to his beliefs, refusing to give away something he believed was meant for the world, not just for the rich. Her eyes stung with tears, because that sounded exactly like him. A man of principle. A man who always told her and her brother to do the right thing even if it was hard. She whispered softly, "That's why he left, isn't it?" Richard looked at her with weary eyes, the kind of eyes that carried years of regret. "Yes," he admitted. After he refused, things became dangerous, not just for him, but for anyone connected to him. He didn't trust anyone anymore, not even me, and then one day he was gone, vanished without leaving a trace. I thought. He stopped himself, his jaw tightening. "I thought he had been silenced, taken away, but if his signature is here again, then maybe he's still alive, maybe he's been working from the shadows all along." The words made Emily's heart pound faster. Alive. The possibility that her father was alive filled her with both joy and fear, but the fear was stronger. If he had been forced into hiding, then he must have been running from something dangerous, something bigger than she could imagine. Her voice shook as she asked, "Dangerous from who? Who wanted his work so badly that he had to disappear?" Richard hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly against the table. His associates shifted uncomfortably again, and for a long moment, Emily thought he would refuse to answer, but then he said quietly, "Men more powerful than even I, men who don't care about families or principles, men who would stop at nothing to control something that valuable. Your father knew that, and maybe that's why he chose to vanish. Maybe he thought disappearing was the only way to protect you." Emily's eyes widened, her throat tightened as tears filled her vision. She thought of her mother sitting alone by the window night after night, refusing to talk about him. She thought of her little brother asking why their father never came home. She thought of herself, carrying the ache of abandonment for years, and now she understood. Maybe he hadn't left them out of weakness. Maybe he had left them out of love. Maybe every lonely night had been a shield he had built to keep them safe from the shadows chasing him. Her knees almost gave way, but she held herself upright, whispering, "He did it for us?" The words trembled from her lips, and for the first time in years, she felt something other than bitterness when she thought of him. She felt gratitude, sorrow, and hope all tangled together. Richard nodded slowly, his voice softer now. "Yes, I believe he did, but it also means he has been carrying that burden alone, and the world he disappeared from is still dangerous." Emily looked at him, her voice steady despite her tears. "Then I have to find him. I have to bring him back." Richard's expression grew darker. He shook his head slightly. "It's not that simple if he's alive. He's alive because he stayed hidden, because he made sure no one could find him. Not even me. If you try to chase him, you might draw out the same forces he's been hiding from all these years." His warning was firm, but it only made Emily's determination stronger. "I don't care," she said quietly but firmly. "He's my father, he's my family, and I've already lived in the dark long enough. I need to know the truth, even if it's dangerous." Richard stared at her, as if seeing in her the same stubborn courage her father once had. His lips pressed tightly, as though he wanted to argue, but he didn't, because deep inside, he knew she would not stop now. The room around them seemed to fade, the restaurant noise becoming distant. For Emily, the world had shifted forever. She had gone from serving meals to carrying a secret that tied her life to powerful men and dangerous truths. She wiped her eyes quickly, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to herself, "I'll find him." The fire in her voice echoing the promise in her heart. The hidden truth had finally surfaced, and it had changed everything. Emily's heart was heavy after hearing Richard's words, though a part of her had felt proud to know her father had stood firm, had refused to give away his invention to greedy men. The truth carried another kind of weight. It was not the happy reunion she had once imagined as a child when she dreamed her father would come back home smiling. Instead, the picture in front of her was darker, filled with secrets, fear, and sacrifices she could hardly begin to understand. She stood there, torn between hope and sorrow, waiting for Richard to explain more. Richard looked down at the papers again, his face shadowed with memories he clearly wished he could forget. He spoke slowly, as if every word cost him something. "Your father was not only protecting you when he disappeared, Emily, he was protecting his work, something that had the power to change everything. And because of that, powerful men wanted him silenced. I tried to convince him to sign. I tried to make him believe he would be safer if he gave up the rights. But he wouldn't. He told me, 'A man's principles are worth more than his life.'" Those words pierced Emily deeply. She could almost hear her father's voice saying them. Strong, steady. The way he used to tell her as a child never to lie, never to take the easy road if it was the wrong one. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to cry in front of this man. She wanted to show the same strength her father had shown, though inside, her heart was breaking all over again. "Do you know where he is?" she asked, her voice soft but desperate. Richard shook his head slowly, his silver hair catching the light. "No, I don't. I searched for him after he vanished. I sent people to find him, but he was clever. He left no trace. It was as if he became a ghost. The only thing left were unsigned contracts, broken deals, and unanswered questions." His voice dropped lower, filled with guilt. "And I let myself believe he was gone, that someone had taken him, that it was too late. So I stopped searching." Emily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "So you gave up?" she whispered, her eyes burning. "You stopped looking, while we sat at home every night, wondering if he was alive. My mother cried herself to sleep for years. My brother asked me questions I could never answer. And you," her voice shook with anger, "you just stopped." Richard closed his eyes briefly, the guilt clear on his face. "I was a coward," he admitted, his voice heavy. "I chose to bury the past instead of facing it, because searching for him meant facing the men who wanted him gone, men who could destroy me too. I told myself it was too dangerous, but deep down, I knew it was because I was afraid." Hearing those words stung Emily even more. This was a man with everything: power, wealth, influence. Yet even he had been too afraid to fight for her father, and here she was, a poor waitress with nothing. Yet she felt a fire inside her that refused to die. "You had resources, you had people," she said firmly. "If you had kept searching, maybe my father would be with us now. Maybe my family wouldn't have suffered all these years." Her voice cracked, and she turned her face slightly, wiping away a tear before it could fall. She hated showing weakness, but the pain was too raw to hide. Richard watched her silently, his expression tight, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, as if restless, haunted. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "I failed him, and I failed you, and nothing I say can change that." The truth in his words did not comfort her. It hurt more, but it also lit another flame inside her. She realized she could no longer depend on men like Richard to give her answers. She would have to search for them herself. Still, before she could move forward, she needed to hear everything, even if it broke her heart. "What else aren't you telling me?" she asked firmly, her eyes locking on his. "There's more. I can see it in your face." Richard hesitated, his jaw tightening, his hands gripping the table as though steadying himself. Finally, in a voice heavy with pain, he confessed, "The night your father disappeared, I was with him. We argued. I begged him to sign, to give up the rights, but he refused. He walked out that night, angry, and I never saw him again. Part of me has always wondered if my pushing him was what forced him to run. If I had respected his decision, maybe he would have stayed, maybe he would have trusted me instead of disappearing." Emily's breath caught, her stomach twisting. The image of her father walking away into the night burned into her mind. Alone, carrying the weight of his decision, she felt her knees weaken, her throat tightening with grief. The painful revelation crashed over her like a wave. Richard had been there. He had argued with him, and that argument might have been the final push that sent her father into hiding. The thought made her chest ache so deeply that she could barely breathe. "You were the last person to see him," she whispered, her voice trembling. You let him walk away." Richard lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "And I have carried that guilt ever since." Emily wanted to scream, to shout, to demand why he hadn't followed, why he hadn't protected her father. But the words caught in her throat, replaced by tears that finally spilled down her cheeks. Her shoulders shaking as years of buried pain rushed out. The restaurant around them blurred, the chatter and clinking dishes fading away. All she could see was the empty chair at their family table, the nights she had cried silently so her brother wouldn't hear, the mornings her mother forced to smile, though her eyes were swollen from tears. And now she knew that her father's last moments of freedom had been spent arguing with this man. The revelation was almost too much to bear, yet it also gave her something she had never had before. A piece of the truth, painful as it was. At least now she knew her father hadn't abandoned them carelessly. He had walked away because he refused to give up what he believed in, because he had chosen to protect his principles and, in his own way, his family, but the cost had been unbearable, a cost they were still paying years later. Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her voice weak but steady. "You may have given up on him, but I won't. I will find him. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how dangerous it is. I need to know if he's still out there." Richard looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and admiration. He saw in her the same fire that had once burned in her father's eyes, the same courage he had underestimated, and in that moment, he realized the past was no longer buried. It was alive, standing in front of him, demanding justice. The painful revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud, but for Emily, it was also a turning point. The truth hurt, but it gave her strength. It gave her direction. And though her heart ached, she knew this was only the beginning of her journey. The restaurant lights seemed softer now, the chatter of customers distant, as if the whole world had shrunk to just two people sitting at table 7, Emily and Richard, one a poor waitress carrying the weight of her family's pain, the other a billionaire haunted by secrets and regrets. Between them lay the shattered truth of a man who had once been father to one and friend to the other, a man who had disappeared into the shadows of his principles and fears. The painful revelation still lingered in the air, but slowly, something new began to grow inside Emily, a determination brighter than her grief. She stood straighter, wiping the last tears from her face, her hands no longer trembling, her voice steady though soft. "I can't change the past, but I can change what happens next," she said, her eyes fixed on Richard. "You may have given up on him, but I never will. I don't care how far I have to go. I don't care what dangers are out there. I will find him and I will bring him home." Her words carried a quiet power that even Richard could not ignore. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with weary eyes, seeing in her not just a desperate daughter but a reflection of the man he had once known. Her father's stubborn courage lived in her, his fire burned in her voice, and for the first time in years, Richard felt something he had long buried, hope, though it came mixed with fear. "You don't know what you're walking into," he warned gently. "The world that forced him into. Hiding is still dangerous, even more so now. If you chase it blindly, you might lose yourself before you find him." But Emily shook her head, determination hardening her features. "I've already lost him once. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering. I'd rather face the danger than live in silence, pretending the truth doesn't matter." She spoke with such certainty that Richard's arguments faltered. He realized nothing could stop her. Not warnings, not fear, not even the weight of his secrets. She was already on a path she would not turn back from. The manager hovered nervously nearby, unsure why the important guest looked shaken, unsure why Emily, the quietest of his staff, was speaking so boldly. But he did not dare interrupt. There was something about the way they spoke, as though they carried history much larger than the four walls of the restaurant, as though the story unfolding at that table belonged to another world entirely, one far bigger and heavier than anything he could imagine. Richard finally sighed, a sound heavy with years of regret. "Then if you are determined, you shouldn't walk this path alone," he admitted, his voice softer now, almost kind. "Your father once trusted me. Even if I failed him in the end, perhaps helping you is my way of making peace with the past. If there is anything I can do to guide you, I will." Emily's eyes widened slightly. She had not expected him to offer help, but she saw the sincerity in his tired face, and though she did not fully trust him yet, she understood he carried pieces of the truth she could not ignore. "Then tell me everything you know," she said firmly. "Every detail, every connection, every name. I'll take whatever you can give me, because even the smallest clue might lead me to him." Richard nodded slowly, as though accepting a responsibility he had long avoided. "I will, but not here, not tonight," he said, glancing around at the crowded room. "This is not a place for such conversations. Meet me tomorrow, and I'll share what I can. There are things you need to see, documents, files, evidence I've kept locked away, things I never thought I'd open again, but if you are truly ready, then I'll open them for you." Emily's heart leapt. Tomorrow. Just the thought of it filled her with both excitement and fear. After years of silence, after years of emptiness, she was finally moving forward. The search for her father was no longer just a dream. It was real. It had begun, and though her future was uncertain, she no longer felt powerless. She had a direction. She had a promise, and she had the fire of determination burning stronger than ever. As the evening drew on, the restaurant returned to its ordinary rhythm. Waiters served meals, families laughed, couples whispered. But Emily felt as if her whole world had shifted. The room looked the same, yet everything was different. The weight of her father's absence had shaped her for years, but now the possibility of his presence, hidden somewhere in the world, reshaped her heart. She no longer carried only grief, she carried a mission. When Richard rose to leave, his associates quickly gathered their things, but his eyes lingered on Emily, and in his gaze there was something like respect, something like recognition. "You remind me of him," he said quietly. "The way you stand, the way you refuse to give up, he would be proud." Emily's throat tightened, tears threatening again, but this time they were not only tears of sorrow, they were mixed with a fragile hope. She nodded once, unable to speak, and watched as he walked out into the night. Later, as she untied her apron and stepped out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, Emily looked up at the dark sky. The stars scattered faintly above the city lights, and for the first time in years, she whispered not with despair, but with promise. "I'll find you, Dad, no matter what." The words floated into the night like a vow, steady and unshakable. She walked home slowly, her tired feet barely noticing the pavement, her mind alive with thoughts, with questions, with plans. Tomorrow would be the start of something new. Tomorrow she would take the first step toward answers, the first step toward her father. She imagined her mother's face when she told her what had happened, her brother's eyes when he heard their father might still be alive. The thought made her chest swell with both joy and fear, because if the journey ahead was dangerous, then she would not only be carrying her hope, but also theirs. Inside her, Fear and courage mixed like two rivers meeting. She knew the path ahead would not be simple. It would test her. It might even break her. But she was no longer the quiet girl who only served tables and hid her pain. She was her father's daughter, carrying his strength, his principles, and his fire. And she was ready to walk into the unknown, ready to uncover the truth, ready to face whatever waited in the shadows. The night closed around her as she reached her home, her heart still beating fast, her steps filled with new purpose. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. This was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something greater. A new chapter written not in silence and sorrow, but in determination and hope. A story that would carry her toward the man she had lost, the father she still loved, and the truth she was finally brave enough to chase.